Start the cutting with folding the knitted fabric right sides together so that the left side of the fabric is on top. Check if the material is folded evenly by measuring the distance of the selvage from the fold line. Lay out the forms of the front and back of the blouse, putting the center line on the fabric fold. Pin everything carefully. Then, add seam allowances of 2 cm for the bottom fold and 1 cm for the other edges. Cut out the elements of the blouse and do not forget about the notches. Next, move on to the facing of the front and back and place the templates on the folding line of the fabric. Secure the pattern with pins and add 1 cm of seam allowance on each side. Cut out the shapes carefully. Now proceed to the second material. Fold the fabric right sides together so that the selvages lie on top of each other. Lay the sleeve template on the left side, making sure the straight thread is an equal distance from the edge of the fabric. Pin everything carefully and add seam allowances of 2 cm for the bottom fold and 1 cm for the other edges. Remember to mark the notches. Cut out the sleeves. Unpin the paper templates. On the right side of the center of the front, draw a vertical line 10 cm long according to the marking on the pattern. Our split is extended to 15 cm. Then do the same on the left side of the facing of the front. After preparing the elements as described above, move on to the next stage. cut out the pieces for lining the front and back facings from the interfacing. Then press them to the left side of the facings. Adjust the edges of the facing and cut off the excess interfacing. Then, line the places where the sleeves are sewn on with foaming tape with straight thread. Mark the sewing place. Pin the front and back facing together. Sew the facings together a centimeter from the edge, but tucking at the beginning and end of the seam. Press the seams flat. Finish the bottom edge of the facing with a 3-thread stitch using the overlocker. Sew on the right side of the fabric or with an overlock stitch using the sewing machine. Sew the edges of the front and back of the blouse in the same way. Finish everything except the neckline cut, the edges of both sleeves, and skip the neckline. It is best to mark the notches with a colored marker or tailor's chalk to make them more visible when pinning and creasing. Next, move on to marking the crease lines on the sleeves. Draw a line 1 cm from the edge from the top of the sleeve to the notch. On the edge of the front and back in both sleeves. Then, choose a thread in a contrasting color and set a longer stitch. Sew with a straight stitch along the marked line. Make the second stitching 2 or 3 mm from the first. Hold the 2 threads at the end of the stitching and crease the fabric densely. Try to space the crease evenly. Sew and crease the other side in the same way. Repeat the whole process for the second sleeve. Make sure the notches on the front of the blouse and the sleeve are aligned the whole time. Pin the pieces right sides of the fabric together. Start the pinning from the beginning and end of the edge and the notch. Fix the beginning of the crease by hooking it onto a pin. Adjust the length of the crease to the facing and fix the end. Spread the crease evenly, then pin everything carefully. Repeat on the other side of the front and proceed to pin the back. Change the threads in the sewing machine to match the color from the design and sew the pinned elements on 1 centimeter from the edge of the fabric. Bar tack at the beginning and end of the stitch. Remove the contrasting threads on the right and left sides. Reinforce the stitching, sew a second time over the stitch. Join the other parts of the front and back with the sleeves in the same way. Next, move on to the neckline split. Place the facing of the front on the front of the blouse, right sides of the fabric together, laying the notches marking the center of the front on top of each other. Match the marked line outlining the split. Using pins as shown, check if the positions of all the elements are right. Sew with a straight stitch along the marked line. And then proceed to pin the facing to the neckline. When pinning the fabric, lay the seams flat towards the sleeves. Also remember to align the notches. Start sewing from the shoulder. Sew the split on both sides of the back stitch at an equal distance of about 3 to 4 millimeters, creating a slightly pointy end. The sewing line can be marked in color to make it easier to stitch. Next, make about 6 mm long notches along the entire length of the neckline. Cut the split along the middle stitch at intervals of 1.5 or even 2 centimeters. Stop cutting 1 millimeter from the tip of the point. Trim the corners of the seam allowances and turn the facing left side out. Measure and mark a point 4 centimeters from the split on both sides and then start understitching from the marked point. Sew the seam allowances to the facing, stitching 1 millimeter from the edge. Next, press the facing to be smooth and fix it to the seams of the sleeves by making small bar tucks that will prevent the facing from sticking out to the right outer side. Now, proceed to sew the edges of the sleeves together with the sides of the blouse. Pin everything carefully, making sure the seams and notches align. And sew with a straight stitch, bar tucking at the beginning and end of the seam. Press the side seams and sleeve seams open. Then, move on to rolling up the sleeve bottoms. Roll them up evenly by 2 centimeters. And rolling up the bottom of the blouse. Marking the line with a tailor's chalk or marker pen. Line the fabric with basting on the overlock stitch line, thus marking your sewing line. Press the resulting fold. Baste the folds of both sleeves as well. To finish the bottom, install a twin needle with a 2.5 mm spacing. You can also use a cover stitch machine. Check the stitch settings on a scrap of material. If everything is in order, proceed to sew on the right side of the blouse. Before reaching the end of the stitch, pull the threads from the beginning to one side and knot them. Then try to end up where the stitch began and overlap it a little. Leave the threads longer. Unstitch the base. And stretch the stitching gently to make it more elastic. Only after this procedure you can pull the threads to the left side, knot and cut them. Finish the sleeves with a twin needle as well to maintain a consistent look. Sew along the line marked with basting. Unstitch the basting, pull the threads through and knot them on the left side. Repeat the steps for the second sleeve. Iron the whole thing and turn it right side out. It's done.